not accidents. These are the killers behind the deaths of black celebrities. Before we begin, prepare yourself, because the stories you're about to hear are not accidents, not mysteries, and certainly not the versions history tried to soften. These black icons didn't lose their lives to fate. Someone made the choice to end them. And tonight we're pulling back the curtain on the people behind these devastating losses. If you believe their legacies deserve truth, not silence, then hit subscribe and join us here on Legends of Black Excellence, where we honor greatness by confronting the reality others avoid. The facts may shock you, but the truth is long overdue. Sam Cooke. The death of Sam Cooke remains one of the most unsettling chapters in American music history and stands as a stark reminder that the loss of black celebrities often comes not from illness or misfortune, but from human actions. Cooke was more than a singer. He was a transformative figure whose voice carried the promise of social change during a turbulent era. On the night of December 11, 1964, that promise was extinguished at the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles when a confrontation in the motel office ended with Cooke lying dead on the floor. His life had not unraveled by chance or circumstance. It ended because someone pulled a trigger. That someone was Bertha Franklin, the motel's manager, who fired the shot that killed the 33-year-old star. According to her testimony, she acted in self-defense after Cooke burst into the office in a frantic attempt to recover his belongings and locate a woman who had fled with his clothing. A coroner's jury accepted her explanation, ruling the killing a justifiable homicide. Yet the decision never settled the public's doubts. Friends and family questioned how a beloved entertainer, widely recognized for his calm demeanor and professionalism, could have been so violently misread, and how a dispute inside a modest roadside motel escalated into a fatal encounter. The tragedy upended more than a flourishing musical career. Cooke was at the forefront of a new movement using his influence to support civil rights efforts and uplift black communities. A Change Is Gonna Come, recorded shortly before his death, became an anthem that outlived him, a testament to both his artistry and his belief in progress. His killing robbed the nation not only of a gifted performer, but of a rising advocate whose voice had begun reaching beyond the stage. That a future so rich with potential was cut short by a split-second decision continues to haunt discussions of his legacy. Nearly 60 years later, the questions surrounding that night have never fully faded. While official records label the shooting as lawful, many remain unconvinced that the full truth was ever uncovered. Sam Cooke's death is a sobering example of why conversations about violence against black public figures remain urgent. It reinforces the theme behind this story. These losses were not accidents, and the individuals responsible left a permanent mark on American culture by ending lives that shaped it. Marvin Gaye. The story of Marvin Gaye's final day fits painfully well under the banner, "Not accidents." These are the killers behind the deaths of black celebrities. His passing was not random, not mysterious, and not the result of a faceless attacker. It happened inside the family home with a weapon fired by the man who had watched him grow up. By 1984, Marvin Gaye was a towering figure in American music, known for What's Going On, Let's Get It On, and a catalog that gave soul and R&B a new emotional depth. Yet behind the success, there were years of tension, depression, and conflict that would finally explode on April 1, 1984. That afternoon, an argument in the Los Angeles house he shared with his parents spiraled out of control. Marvin, 44 years old and only one day away from his birthday, clashed bitterly with his father, Reverend Marvin Gaye Sr., after a dispute involving his mother. Witnesses later described a heated exchange that turned physical. Moments later, the older man retrieved a handgun, a pistol Marvin himself had reportedly given to his mother for protection, and fired at his son. The first shot struck Marvin in the chest, piercing his heart. A second bullet followed. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead shortly afterward. Law enforcement did not treat this as a mystery or an unsolved case. Gaye Sr. was arrested at the scene and initially faced a murder charge. Medical examinations uncovered a brain tumor, and his defense emphasized his fragile health and emotional state. In court, he eventually entered a plea of no contest to voluntary manslaughter instead of standing trial for murder. The judge handed down a suspended prison term and several years of probation, meaning Marvin's father avoided a long stay behind bars, despite having taken the life of one of the most influential recording artists of his generation. For many fans, and for Black America in particular, that outcome never fully felt like justice. Marvin Gaye had used his art to question war, racism, environmental destruction, and spiritual emptiness. His music asked the nation to listen, to care, to change. The fact that his life ended not in a public tragedy, but in a private act of violence by a parent's hand, makes his death one of the clearest examples of why we say these were not accidents. Someone pulled the trigger, and the cost was a voice that had helped define an era. Merlin Santana. Merlin Santana's story adds another painful chapter to the theme, not accidents, these are the killers behind the deaths of Black celebrities. He was not just a familiar face on television. He was a young Afro-Latino performer whose charm and talent won over audiences on The Steve Harvey Show and earlier as a child actor on The Cosby Show. By his mid-20s, he had already spent most of his life working in front of the camera, building a career that many believed would carry him into leading roles. But in November 2002, that future was stolen in a matter of seconds on a quiet Los Angeles street. On the night of November 9, 2002, Santana was sitting in a car after leaving a friend's home when another vehicle pulled alongside. Without warning, shots were fired. A single bullet struck him in the head, killing him at just 26 years old. This was not a random drive-by from a stranger with no connection to him. Investigators later revealed that the shooter, Damian Andre Gates, acted after being misled by his girlfriend Monique King, a teenager, who had falsely claimed Santana had behaved inappropriately toward her. That lie set off a chain of events that turned jealousy and anger into murder. Prosecutors laid out the story in court. King's false accusations fueled rage. Gates armed himself, and together with an accomplice, they went looking for Santana. The jury heard how Gates fired into the car where the actor sat, and how the killing came directly from choices made that night, not from fate, not from chance. The court convicted Gates of first-degree murder and attempted murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. King, tried as a juvenile, was found responsible for her role in setting up the ambush and received a sentence within the youth system. For viewers who grew up watching Merlin Santana's work, his death feels especially bitter. Here was a young man who had navigated the pressures of child stardom, found steady work, and represented Black and Latino visibility on mainstream television. His life did not end because his time had come, but because specific people decided to believe a lie, pick up a gun, and open fire. That is precisely why his case fits this series. It reminds us that behind the headlines of another fallen celebrity are real individuals whose deliberate actions ended a life that was still on the rise. Stephanie Mosley. Stephanie Mosley was a gifted Canadian-born performer of African descent, known in Hollywood as both a precise, hard-working dancer and a rising actress. Viewers saw her move with effortless grace on the VH1 series Hit the Floor, and music fans caught glimpses of her in tours and music videos for stars like Chris Brown and Britney Spears. At just 30, she stood at the crossroads of television and music with a future that looked bright and full of momentum. Behind the scenes, her personal life was far more turbulent. Mosley was married to rapper Earl Hayes, a close associate of boxer Floyd Mayweather Jr. Friends and acquaintances later described a relationship strained by jealousy, allegations of cheating, and repeated arguments. In the early morning of December 8, 2014, those tensions reached a breaking point inside their Los Angeles apartment. Neighbors told police they heard shouting, then a series of gunshots, and then silence. When officers forced their way inside, they found a devastating scene: Stephanie Mosley dead from gunshot wounds, and Earl Hayes also deceased with a handgun nearby. Based on ballistic evidence, the positioning of the bodies, and witness statements, investigators concluded that Hayes had shot his wife multiple times before turning the gun on himself. Authorities classified the case as a clear murder-suicide. There was no unknown attacker, no suggestion of a third party, only a fatal act of domestic violence. For fans who had watched Mosley dance with such control and confidence, the setting of her final moments is particularly painful. She did not die in a public confrontation or a random street crime, but in what should have been the safety of her own home at the hands of the man she lived with and loved. Her story stands as a stark reminder that behind the glamorous images of Black entertainers, there are private battles and, in some tragic cases, deliberate acts that end promising lives far too soon. Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was a 17-year-old African-American teenager whose death became one of the most defining moments in the modern conversation about race and justice in the United States. He was visiting his father in Sanford, Florida, on the night of February 26, 2012, when a simple walk to a convenience store turned into a national tragedy. Carrying only a bag of Skittles and a can of iced tea, Trayvon was heading back through a gated community when he was noticed by George Zimmerman, a neighborhood watch volunteer who was driving through the area. What followed would change the course of public discourse for years to come. Zimmerman called the police to report what he viewed as a suspicious person despite dispatchers instructing him not to pursue. Moments later, a confrontation unfolded between the two. What exactly happened in those minutes has been debated heavily, but the encounter ended with a single fatal gunshot. When authorities arrived, Trayvon Martin was lying on the ground unarmed. The incident quickly made headlines not only because of the victim's youth, but because the circumstances seemed to highlight long-standing racial tensions between Black communities and local law enforcement systems. Public pressure and widespread protests led to Zimmerman's eventual arrest and a charge of second-degree murder, along with a manslaughter count. The resulting trial in 2013 became one of the most closely watched cases in the nation. Zimmerman's legal team argued that he had acted in self-defense, citing Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Despite intense scrutiny and emotional testimony, a jury ultimately acquitted him of all charges. The verdict shocked many Americans and reignited conversations about racial profiling, gun laws, and the systemic vulnerabilities facing young Black men. Trayvon Martin's death was not the result of chance or unavoidable misfortune. It stemmed from a series of decisions made by an armed civilian who chose to confront a teenager walking home. His story later fueled the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, cementing his name as a symbol of the urgent need for accountability and change. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was far more than a historic figure. He was the moral voice of a generation, a leader whose words carried the weight of a nation struggling to define its conscience. As the most prominent figure of the civil rights movement, he championed nonviolence, equality, and justice at a time when the country was deeply divided. His leadership helped bring about landmark changes, including the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. In 1964, he received the Nobel Peace Prize, becoming one of the youngest recipients in history. By 1968, he remained the guiding force behind movements for racial and economic equality, even as threats against his life grew more frequent and more serious. Those threats turned into a heartbreaking reality on the evening of April 4, 1968, when King stepped onto the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. He had traveled to the city to support striking sanitation workers, men fighting for dignity, fair pay, and basic respect. At 6:01 p.m., a single rifle shot rang out, striking him in the face and dropping him instantly. The scene descended into chaos as friends and aides pointed across the street toward a nearby rooming house, where smoke was seen drifting from a bathroom window. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, but was pronounced dead shortly after 7 p.m. A moment that sent shockwaves across the country. The man at the center of the investigation was James Earl Ray, a fugitive who had escaped from a Missouri state penitentiary a year earlier. After an international manhunt, Ray was captured at London's Heathrow Airport on June 8, 1968. Facing overwhelming evidence including ballistic matches, fingerprints, and eyewitness accounts, he entered a guilty plea in March 1969 to avoid the death penalty. A judge sentenced him to 99 years in prison, where he remained until his death in 1998. Ray later attempted to recant his confession, but multiple reviews, including by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, reaffirmed his role as the gunman. King's assassination was not a random act. It was a deliberate killing carried out by a man who positioned himself with a rifle and waited for the right moment. The loss silenced a voice that had guided millions, yet it also crystallized King's legacy as a symbol of courage and peaceful resistance, a legacy built in part on the truth that his death was no accident, but a violent act that changed the course of American history. Malcolm X. Malcolm X was one of the most influential and electrifying figures of the 20th century. A man whose voice reshaped the national conversation about race identity and power in America. As a leading spokesman for the Nation of Islam during the 1950s and early 1960s, he challenged segregation with a boldness that unsettled white America and inspired black audiences who were tired of waiting for justice. Later, after breaking with the organization and undertaking a transformative pilgrimage to Mecca, Malcolm embraced a broader, more global vision of equality, one rooted in human rights rather than solely racial separation. By 1965, he had become a symbol of black dignity and defiance, and his evolving message was gaining both widespread admiration and dangerous enemies. Those tensions converged on February 21, 1965, inside the Audubon Ballroom in New York City. Malcolm X was preparing to address the Organization of Afro-American Unity when chaos erupted. As he stepped to the podium, hecklers created a diversion, and within seconds, multiple gunmen rushed forward. A hail of bullets struck him in the chest and body as his wife and children watched in horror. Malcolm was rushed to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, but was pronounced dead shortly afterward at the age of 39. The assassination stunned the nation and extinguished a voice that had been rapidly evolving into a global force for liberation. In the investigation that followed, authorities arrested 3 men: Thomas Hagen, also known as Talmadge X, Hayer, Norman Butler, and Thomas Johnson, all of whom were affiliated with the Nation of Islam. Hagen was the only one who confessed his role repeatedly, admitting he fired shots during the attack. In 1966, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Over the years, Hagen consistently maintained that Butler and Johnson were not involved, claims that eventually contributed to their exonerations decades later. But his own participation was never in question. He openly acknowledged being one of the gunmen who carried out the killing. Malcolm X's death was not the result of chance or tragic circumstance. It was an orchestrated attack rooted in ideological fractures, betrayal, and rising hostility. A man who sought to empower Black Americans was taken down by individuals who saw his independence as a threat. His assassination remains one of the clearest reminders that the struggle for justice has often come at the cost of deliberate, targeted violence, violence that ended the life of a leader who had only begun to reveal the full power of his vision. Tupac Shakur. Tupac Shakur was more than a rapper. He was a cultural force whose voice defined an era. Blending poetic vulnerability with fiery social commentary, he became one of the most influential figures in hip-hop history. By the mid-1990s, his fame stretched far beyond music. He was acting in major films, shaping conversations about racial inequality, and becoming a symbol of the complexities and contradictions of Black America. But on the night of September 7, 1996, his career and life were violently cut short in a way that would haunt the nation for decades. That evening, Tupac was in Las Vegas, riding in the passenger seat of a BMW driven by Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight. After attending a boxing match, their car stopped at a red light on East Flamingo Road. A white Cadillac pulled up alongside them, a window rolled down, and a burst of gunfire erupted into the night. Tupac was struck multiple times, suffering critical wounds to his chest, pelvis, and lung. He was rushed to University Medical Center, where doctors fought to keep him alive. Despite their efforts, he died 6 days later on September 13, 1996, at just 25 years old. His killing immediately became one of the most discussed and controversial crimes in American pop culture. For years, the case remained officially unsolved, fueling endless theories and speculation. Witnesses refused to cooperate, evidence was thin, and investigators struggled with the code of silence that surrounded the shooting. Still, one name surfaced repeatedly in interviews and street accounts: Dwayne Keffe D. Davis, a Compton gang figure who claimed first-hand knowledge of the incident. In various statements over the years, Davis positioned himself near the center of events, though no charges were filed at the time. That long-standing ambiguity changed dramatically in September 2023, when Las Vegas authorities arrested Davis and charged him with murder with a deadly weapon, alleging that he orchestrated the attack as part of a gang retaliation. As of now, Davis remains accused, not convicted, and the courts will determine the outcome based on evidence presented at trial. But his indictment marked the first major legal breakthrough in the case since Tupac's death. The shooting was not an accident, nor a mystery shrouded in myth. It was a targeted act of violence carried out by real individuals whose decisions ended the life of an artist whose influence still resonates around the world. Jam Master Jay. Jam Master Jay, born Jason Mizell, was the musical backbone of Run DMC, the pioneering group that pushed hip-hop from New York streets into the global mainstream. With his sharp cuts, explosive energy, and instinctive sense of rhythm, Jay helped shape the sound of an entire era and paved the way for hip-hop to become the first widely accepted mainstream rap movement. By 2002, he was seen as a mentor and a stabilizing figure in the Queens music community, a respected artist who guided younger generations both inside and outside the studio. That's part of what made his death not only a crime, but a cultural shock. On the evening of October 30th, 2002, Jam Master Jay was inside his recording studio on Merrick Boulevard, a place he treated like home. There was no concert, no crowd, just a regular work session with friends and colleagues. Around 7:30 p.m., two men he knew entered the studio. Seconds later, gunfire erupted. Jay was shot in the head at close range and died almost instantly. The attack was swift, deliberate, and targeted not a burst of random violence, not a mistaken identity, but a purposeful execution carried out by people who had earned his trust. For nearly 2 decades, the case remained shrouded in silence. Fear kept witnesses quiet, and investigators lacked the evidence needed to move forward. Still, 2 names continued surfacing in case files and conversations: Carl Jordan Jr. and Ronald Washington, longtime acquaintances of Jam Master Jay and early suspects. It wasn't until February 2024, nearly 22 years after the killing, that a federal jury delivered a decisive verdict. Jordan Jr. and Washington were found guilty of orchestrating and carrying out the murder, which prosecutors linked to a drug dispute after Jay reportedly refused to participate in a trafficking deal. The verdict made one truth undeniable: Jam Master Jay's death was never an unsolvable mystery or a tragic accident. It was the result of greed, betrayal, and violence actions taken by real individuals who chose to end the life of a man who helped shape the sound and spirit of hip-hop. Even though justice arrived late, it affirmed that behind every fallen legend stands a story with names, motives, and consequences that cannot be ignored. Nipsey Hussle. Nipsey Hussle, born Ermias Asghedom, was more than a celebrated rapper. He was a cornerstone of the South Los Angeles community. Long before mainstream recognition, he invested in local businesses, advocated for economic empowerment, and used his success to uplift the neighborhood that raised him. His store, Marathon Clothing, wasn't just a retail shop. It was a symbol of Black entrepreneurship and a gathering place where residents felt seen, heard, and valued. By 2019, Nipsey had become a rare figure in hip-hop, an artist, a mentor, and a community builder whose influence stretched far beyond music charts. On March 31, 2019, the mission he worked tirelessly to build came to a tragic halt. Nipsey was standing outside his store on Crenshaw Boulevard, talking with friends and offering support to a former inmate he hoped to help re-enter society. In broad daylight, a man approached someone Nipsey had known for years. That man was Eric R. Holder Jr. Moments later, Holder opened fire, striking Nipsey multiple times before fleeing the scene. The shooting sent shockwaves through Los Angeles and across the nation. The idea that such a beloved figure could be gunned down in the very neighborhood he was trying to improve felt like a deep betrayal. The investigation moved quickly. Surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, and ballistic evidence pointed directly to Holder. Prosecutors argued that the attack was targeted and motivated by personal conflict, not gang retaliation as some initially feared. During the trial, the courtroom heard detailed testimony describing how Holder walked up, shot Nipsey repeatedly, and then returned to fire again, a sequence that left no doubt about intent. In February 2023, a Los Angeles County jury convicted Holder of first-degree murder along with additional charges for injuring 2 bystanders. A judge later sentenced him to 60 years to life in prison, closing one chapter, but leaving a lasting wound on the community Nipsey championed. His death was not an accident, not a random act of violence. It was a deliberate killing carried out by a man who chose to silence a voice dedicated to rebuilding South LA. And in that truth lies the tragedy that still reverberates, because Nipsey Hussle's life was dedicated to progress, and his loss remains a stark reminder of what unchecked violence can take away. XXXTentacion, born Jahseh Dwayne. Onfroy emerged as one of the most influential young artists of the SoundCloud rap wave. His raw, emotional delivery and willingness to explore themes like depression, heartbreak, and inner turmoil set him apart from his peers. Songs such as Sad Changes and Jocelyn Flores resonated deeply with millions of listeners, turning him into the defining voice of a generation searching for honesty in music. By 2018, at only 20 years old, he had already reached mainstream success and was widely viewed as an artist whose creative potential was just beginning to unfold. That promise was shattered on June 18, 2018 in Deerfield Beach, Florida. After leaving a motorcycle dealership, XXXTentacion was driving away when an SUV suddenly blocked his car. 2 armed men jumped out, demanding the Louis Vuitton bag he carried, which contained cash from a recent purchase. A brief struggle followed, ending when one of the assailants fired multiple shots into the young rapper's neck and chest. Emergency responders rushed him to Broward Health North, but he was pronounced dead shortly afterward. The attack was swift, coordinated, and undeniably intentional. The investigation that followed moved quickly. Surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, and physical evidence led detectives to conclude that the killing was not random, but a planned robbery. Authorities soon arrested Michael Boatwright, Trayvon Newsom, and Dedrick Williams, linking each man directly to the ambush. Prosecutors presented a strong case built on video evidence, digital records, and testimony that placed the trio at the scene. In 2023, after a highly publicized trial, all 3 were convicted of first-degree murder and armed robbery, receiving life sentences without the possibility of parole. XXXTentacion's death serves as a stark reminder that the losses of young Black entertainers are often the result of deliberate decisions made by individuals who choose violence over humanity. At the height of his creative rise, he became the target of a crime driven by greed and opportunity, an act that silenced a voice influencing millions. His story reinforces the central truth behind these tragedies. They were not accidents, but the intentional acts of those who ended lives destined for greatness. Pop Smoke. Pop Smoke, born Bashar Baraka. Jackson was a rising star who brought the raw energy of Brooklyn drill to the national stage. With hits like Dior and Welcome to the Party, he helped redefine the sound of East Coast hip-hop, blending gritty street storytelling with a charismatic presence that drew in fans across generations. By early 2020, he was on the verge of superstardom, collaborating with major artists, touring widely, and preparing to release his debut album. His deep, smoky voice and effortless confidence made him instantly recognizable, and many believed he was poised to become the next major figure in rap. But in the early hours of February 19, 2020, that trajectory was violently cut short. Pop Smoke was staying at a rented home in the Hollywood Hills, celebrating success with friends and preparing for future projects. Overnight, a group of intruders, including teenagers and a 19-year-old adult, broke into the house after seeing the address publicly revealed in a social media post. According to investigators, the suspects planned a robbery targeting jewelry cache and luxury items. When they entered the bedroom where Pop Smoke was staying, a confrontation erupted. Shot during the struggle, he was transported to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, but died from his injuries at just 20 years old. The investigation uncovered a chilling truth. This was not a random break-in, but a coordinated home invasion driven by greed. Among those charged, Corey Walker, the only adult involved, played a central organizing role. Prosecutors detailed how he and the younger accomplices planned the robbery and armed themselves before entering the property. Although Walker was not the gunman, he admitted responsibility for the crime. In 2024, he pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and armed robbery. A judge sentenced him to 29 years in prison, marking a significant step toward accountability. Pop Smoke's death stands as one more example of how promising young black artists have been taken not by accidents or misfortune, but by deliberate actions rooted in violence and exploitation. His life, filled with ambition and rising influence, was ended by choices made in a single night. Choices that silenced a voice reshaping the sound of modern hip-hop. Young Dolph. Young Dolph, born Adolph Robert Thornton Jr., built his name the hard way as a fiercely independent rapper from Memphis who refused to bend to the traditional music industry system. His breakthrough project, King of Memphis, announced him as a force in Southern hip-hop, and over time he became just as well known for his generosity as for his gritty lyrics. He gave away cars to fans donated to schools and regularly returned to his old neighborhood with both money and opportunities. For many people in Memphis, he wasn't just a performer. He was living proof that someone from their streets could make it and still come back to invest in home. On November 17, 2021, that connection to his community placed him exactly where he loved to be, at a local black-owned business. Young Dolph stopped by Makeda's Homemade Butter Cookies in South Memphis, a shop he'd publicly supported before. As he stood inside, gunmen pulled up outside and opened fire through the window. He was struck multiple times and died at the scene. The attack was swift and calculated, a classic ambush carried out in broad daylight at a place where he should have been completely at ease. The investigation led authorities to identify two primary suspects, including Justin Johnson, a man with ties to the area. Prosecutors argued that Dolph had been deliberately targeted and that the shooters had planned the attack rather than acting on impulse. After a widely followed trial, a jury found Johnson guilty of first-degree murder conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and additional weapons offenses. He was sentenced to life in prison with extra time added for the related charges, effectively ensuring he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Young Dolph's killing was not a random tragedy or a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was a purposeful act of violence carried out by men who made a series of choices that ended the life of a father entrepreneur and hometown hero whose impact stretched far beyond music. Takeoff Migos. Takeoff, born Kershnik Kari Ball, was the quiet architect behind the success of Migos, the Atlanta trio that reshaped modern hip-hop with hits like Bad and Bougie, Stir Fry, and Fight Night. While Offset and Quavo often stood in the spotlight, Takeoff was the group's technical backbone, precise, inventive, and unmistakably skilled. Fans admired him for his calm demeanor and humility qualities that set him apart in an industry known for loud personalities. At just 28, he was widely regarded as the most lyrically sharp member of Migos, and his solo career was beginning to flourish. In the early hours of November 1, 2022, that promising path was abruptly cut short. Takeoff was standing near Quavo outside a Houston bowling alley when an argument involving other individuals quickly escalated. Witnesses later said he was not part of the dispute and was simply observing from a distance. But when the confrontation turned violent, gunfire erupted. A stray bullet struck Takeoff in the head and torso, killing him instantly. The hip-hop world was stunned. One of its most peaceful and introspective voices had been taken in a conflict that had nothing to do with him. Weeks later, Houston police arrested Patrick Xavier Clark, identifying him as the suspected shooter. Clark was charged with murder, and court records revealed he had a passport and a large amount of cash at the time of his arrest. Facts that raised concerns about a possible attempt to flee. Investigators cited forensic evidence and witness statements linking him to the firearm used in the shooting. Still under the law, Clark remains accused, not convicted, as the case continues through the judicial process. Takeoff's death was not a tragic accident or a moment of unfortunate circumstance. It resulted from a reckless act of gun violence during an argument that had nothing to do with him. His loss is a painful reminder that even the most grounded and gentle figures in music can become victims of chaos created by others. His absence leaves a quiet but profound void in hip-hop, one that still feels impossible to fill. PNB Rock. PNB Rock-born Rakim Hashim Allen was a Philadelphia-born rapper and singer whose melodic blend of rap and R&B made him one of the most recognizable voices of his era. With hits like Selfish Fleek and Everyday We Lit, he carved out a unique lane, vulnerable, melodic, and deeply personal. His ability to switch effortlessly between hooks and verses earned him collaborations across hip-hop and pop, while his authenticity resonated strongly with fans who saw him rise from hardship to stardom. By 2022, he had become a respected figure whose music reflected both struggle and growth. That upward journey came to a tragic end on September 12, 2022, during what should have been an ordinary lunch in South Los Angeles. PNB Rock was dining at Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles with his girlfriend when armed assailants entered the restaurant. Witnesses described the attack as shockingly fast. The gunman demanded his jewelry, a struggle followed, and gunshots rang out moments later. He was rushed to a nearby hospital but succumbed to his injuries shortly after. The brazenness of the daylight attack in a busy restaurant stunned the public and added another heartbreaking entry to the list of talented black artists taken by deliberate violence. The investigation quickly identified a disturbing dynamic behind the crime. Authorities determined that Freddie Lee Trone had orchestrated the robbery, directing his 17-year-old son to carry out the attack while acting as the getaway driver. According to prosecutors, Trone's son confronted PNB Rock, shot him, and stole his jewelry before fleeing with his father. The case left no ambiguity. This was a targeted robbery planned by individuals who saw an opportunity and chose lethal force to seize it. In court, Trone was held responsible for masterminding the fatal encounter. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole, only after roughly 31 years, ensuring that he will spend decades behind bars for his role in the killing. The severity of the sentence reflected the intentionality of the act, a calculated decision that ended the life of a young artist whose career still held enormous potential. PNB Rock's death, like so many others in this series, underscores a painful truth. These tragedies are not accidents, but the result of intentional choices made by those who chose violence over humanity. As we close this chapter on Legends of Black Excellence, one truth remains undeniable. These losses were not accidents, nor mysteries bound to fade with time. They were deliberate acts that cut short lives filled with brilliance, creativity, and purpose. Each story carries its own weight, its own lessons, and its own echoes of what might have been. Yet, remembering these figures is more than recounting tragedy. It is a commitment to honor their impact while refusing to excuse the violence that stole them away. Their voices shaped history, and through remembrance, their legacies continue to rise above the darkness that ended their lives.